All right, so I am here in Abraham's tent, hoping to talk about Passover today. So we're going to talk about Pesach. Passover, Pesach, same thing. Pesach is the Hebrew way of saying Passover. Interesting that I just started filming, and of course my neighbor, I'm outside in our backyard with our Abraham's tent set up, and of course our neighbor started to his chainsaw up, or his weed eater, whatever it is, and it is super noisy. So I am hoping that this mic picks me up because I'm doing this anyway. It is unbelievable how set against walking this path of repentance is. It's, as soon as, you begin to open your mouth, there's things that come up that Hasatan just like, I cannot believe that. So Passover was just a day or two ago. It was 2 days ago, and on Passover, we set up our Abraham's tent in our backyard. The first time in a long time we've set it up. I'm so excited to be here in it. I have been waiting for a time when we could set up the Abraham's tent again so that I could film the Passover, the basics Passover video that I have in my feast, that I need in my feast block. So many of you have asked, where is your spring feast basics block? And I'm like, I just haven't had the time yet. So I have asked for the Ruach HaKodesh to come and fill me up today so that we can talk about and unpack the very crucial rehearsal of Pesach. Today it is actually supposed to be about 70 degrees here, which is amazing. It has been rain and snowing and sleet and just awful weather up until actually the day of Passover this year when we put the tent up. We couldn't figure out a reason why not to put it up because it was beautiful weather and promised to be beautiful weather for the next week, the whole week of this spring feast season. So we decided to do that and let Papa bring us guests, and he has. So as you know, it is super important to be on the correct calendar so that you can actually find the correct day of Passover. So Rosh Hashanah being the head of the year in the springtime, according to the biblical calendar, which is finding the Aviv barley in Israel, and that next new moon will be Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, kind of like New Year's Day for YHVH's people. You find that, and then you count 14 days till you find Passover. Oh, and by the way, if you need help with understanding the biblical calendar and how to actually find Passover, you need to be able to find Rosh Hashanah in order to find Passover. So if you need some help with that, definitely go watch my Feast Basics block on Rosh Hashanah, and that goes over calendar, so then you can have a really clearer understanding what the scriptural and biblical calendar is, so that you can find Passover. And let me tell you, it's not the equinox. Okay, it's not the Inashuan calendar, it's not the patriarchal calendar, it's not the rabbinical calendar. All right, so go watch that video and it will enlighten you, I think. Now, just let's refresh. Passover is actually a work day, and something that I am super, passionate about is trying to help people understand this doesn't mean that you get to go out and just work for another kingdom, okay? So you are supposed to work for YHVH's kingdom on that day, preparing the Passover, okay? Preparing the meal, preparing the Seder, preparing for your guests to come or for your family, whatever it be. So Passover, yes, is a work day, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be taking it off of work because it's a rehearsal day, okay? As soon as night falls on Passover, it starts the high Shabbat of unleavened bread. And remember, unleavened bread goes for 7 days, and the last day of unleavened bread is another high Shabbat. And I've got another teaching coming that I'm going to do this week on unleavened bread because it is a feast in its own. But it is super hard to kind of pull out each feast from the whole spring feast season because they are so intertwined and you need one in order to have the other. But today I'm going to really just look at Passover. So yes, we find it by counting 14 days from the head of the year, and that is a work day, a work for YHVH day. You're going to prepare the Passover Seder. You're going to prepare for the upcoming event that happens at twilight on Passover, which ushers in that first high day of unleavened bread. Interesting enough, back when the Hebrew slaves were coming out of Egypt, they were actually on that night, Passover, remember they smeared the blood on their doorposts, and then the destroyer moved over them, and later that night they got the word to go and they started going on that high Shabbat. Super cool. But I'll talk about that in another teaching for unleavened bread. Let me get back to Passover. Focus, So on Passover this year we had company. We had a beautiful Seder right here with some new friends. It was just lovely. We had a wonderful time getting to know them, and it happened to be company that YHVH ELOHIM actually sent us for real. Like, seriously, he sent these people to us. We didn't do any advertising or anything. He just made the connection happen, and they ended up here at our Seder, our personal private family Seder, and it was awesome. So I think that with that said, let's get going and unpack this wonderful, incredible feast of Passover. So some things that are going to be super important to really understanding Passover is going to be the chronological Gospels, because it puts things in perspective as to where he was at what time, so that you know where he was on Passover and what he was doing. It's chronological, which I just love. So we have to clear up the first thing we have to clear up here is that, number one, is Passover just for the Jews? No. This is YHVH's Passover. To begin, I love Psalms 23, and I'm sure you do too. And in there, one of the things in there that I didn't know until just recently was that you remember it says, YHVH is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness. And it actually says that word is cycles. In cycles of righteousness, which would be cycles of right doings. Is that not amazing? And one thing I'm going to share with you right here is this is my Spring Feast handbook. You can totally pick this up, and in here there's lots more detail. I'm going to kind of highlight this right now, but you can get this and really study into more and find other places to study as well that helps you understand these things. But as Rodney Wilkinson says, a more literal translation of this could be, he leads me in, guides me from, and bestows on me his cycles of righteousness on account of his name and authority. Isn't that cool? So when I see that, I think of cycles of right doings, and the feasts are definitely a cycle, are they not? So every single year you have these annual feasts that cycle throughout the year, and you have the monthly feasts that cycle, and then you have Shabbat that cycles, as well as the winter festivals. So I thought that was really cool. So just to give like a little overview here, just so you know and remember, the 3 of the 4 spring feasts are actually found in the very first month, the month of Aviv. So we're in the month of Aviv. Rosh Hashanah starts the head of that month. It's the first day of the month, and then you count 14 days and find Passover. The next day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and it goes for 7 days. And during that time you have first fruits, which happens on the day after the weekly Shabbat during unleavened bread. And that's another story right there that we'll talk about. But basically the one that is not in the first month is Shavuot, and that is in the 3rd month, all right? So, and also my family and I, and any believer in Yeshua should really honor his work, honor Messiah's work. So we celebrate the Last Supper, which happened before Passover, and I'll have another video on that. And then we also celebrate his resurrection, which happens on Shabbat, the end of Shabbat, right before sunset, that Shabbat before it kicks in first fruits. Okay, and they go really fast. It's like a little waterfall, because you'll hit you'll hit Passover, and then boom, it's unleavened bread, and then boom, it's resurrection, and then boom, it's like first fruits. It goes really fast. There's a lot to cover in it, and Yehovah's going, keep up with me. I've got a lot of stuff to teach you and talk about. All right, so a little overview of Passover, okay? During Passover, which we can only actually rehearse now, Yehovah promised that when he saw the blood of a perfect year-old lamb applied to the doorposts of the Hebrew slaves' homes in Egypt, that he would hover over them, protecting their firstborn children from the destroyer. That was a shadow picture of Yeshua, who was the year-old slain Passover lamb. With the application of his blood by faith to our hearts, the final judgment passes over us. His blood redeems us from a life of bondage and opens the door to life. He paid the price for Israel committing adultery at Mount Sinai and beyond, which opened the doors for all Israel and those in exile to return to the covenant and keep the royal law through the power of the new covenant, or the new contract. I call them contracts, as you probably already know if you watched any of my videos. That first contract at Mount Sinai to the royal law, they broke, and then Yeshua brought a new contract that we get to keep the royal law that's superior to the other one, to the first one. All right. Keeping Passover, keeping the Feast of Yehovah is a very integral part of what it means to be Hebrew. Okay, Yehovah asked us to pass down remembrance of him to our children, to the next generation. This is one of the reasons I go to extreme efforts to celebrate in a manner that is going to really burn the images on the hearts of the people that are around me. We had 2 little girls here last night, little girls, and for our Feast of Unleavened Bread celebration, and they were like in awe of this tent in our backyard. And the thing is huge, right? They will never ever forget Abraham's tent. They will never forget eating matzah in Abraham's tent. That is like impressed upon their heart. So I'm helping to impress upon their heart the ways of Yehovah, helping them to remember. So another reason why it is so important to rehearse Yehovah's feast annually, and why he wants us to do this, is when we talk about his story, when we proclaim his name among the world, among people and the nations and stuff, he's glorified. And we become witnesses for him of his goodness. And this is a super important job of a Melchizedek priest, is to glorify his name among the earth and tell of his goodness. Another thing that it does for us is actually helps us know where we are in the story, right? So we know that the spring feasts have been fulfilled, but the fall feasts have not. And this is awesome. We can look at the spring feast and we can go, oh, they were fulfilled to the day, to the hour. And then we can say, whoa, if he did that then he's going to do it again in the fall. Why should I not keep the fall feast so I can pay attention, so I can be a watchman on the tower, so I can actually be paying attention to what is going to happen, and I can, know the time and the season. I may not know the day or the hour, but I'll know the time and the season when the king will return. So yes, he's fulfilled the spring feast as the sacrificial lamb, right? The fall, he hasn't fulfilled those yet. He's going to come back as the reigning king. He's going to bring his Melchizedek administration to earth. He's going to reestablish Jehovah's Torah and his instructions in the earth for that 1,000 years. And that is something we all, as disciples of Yeshua, want to be around to witness, right? Especially in these last days when you're going, oh, I think he just might come in my lifetime. So yes, when we remember that there are so many other demons who try to play Elohim, want to be Elohim, and want to get us enslaved into their things, that we have a deliverer who's coming in the fall. And so we can look at the history of that deliverer, Yeshua, and say, whoa, he fulfilled that. He did everything exactly like that to the day and the hour. So now we can look to the fall and find a ton of hope in that as we look forward to the when he delivers his people Israel. Okay, one thing that we must remember is that Yehovah says constantly to Israel, you must remember. Remember what I did for you in Egypt. Remember that I brought you out of Egypt. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but I saved you. I delivered you. He says, remember, remember, remember. So when you see him say that over and over and over, it leads you to think that perhaps there's going to be times when he's not going to be parting the waters for us every day, right? We're not going to see the pillar of cloud all the time. And so we must remember what he did so that we know that he's alive and well and that he still can and he still will fulfill the promises that he spoke of through his prophets in the scriptures. So one of these rehearsal of Passover is to help us, at the heart of it, is to help us remember Yehovah. Remember that he is the deliverer. Remember what he is capable of doing and what he promised us that he will do. So this is super important to consider as you rehearse all the feasts or you celebrate the feast, is that, you know, a large part of this establishing of these feasts for us is so we don't forget, because we're complete forgetters, right? I mean, I am in this subject matter constantly, probably more than the average person, but I still come up to a feast and go, oh, what is this feast about? I totally forgot. It doesn't take long for me to get acquainted with it again and remember all the beautiful things about it, but you know, I'm in it all the time. I want to remember. What about people who, you know, maybe sort of, you know, they kind of want to remember, if somebody helps them remember, but they're not really in it all the time? I mean, you're going to forget. You're going to forget. And you're going to just kind of go with the flow of everyone else around you. And pretty soon you will have forgotten your Elohim. You will have forgotten the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you will be on your way to to continue on serving your own gods, right? So this is so important for us to really understand what's at the heart of all these feast days. Because if you add them all up, you've got 70 commanded feasts a year, which is crazy. That's so many. If you add on to those simply to honor the work of Messiah, which hadn't happened in the Torah yet, but if you want to acknowledge his resurrection, acknowledge his ascension, and you keep the winter festivals, you're looking at like 90 plus feasts a year. That's crazy. It's going to really keep you hopping and keep you super busy remembering Yehovah. And I think we need those. I think most people would be fine with forgetting, because that's kind of, it's hard. This is an uphill, you know, it's a paddle upstream when everyone else is doing other things, for you to stop in the middle of your work week and pay attention to something that Yehovah wants you to pay attention to, and he talk about something he wants to talk about. So a large part of this, remember, right now, I'm telling you to remember, is to remember Yehovah and what he has done in the past. And today, in this world the way it is, oh my, do we not need to be reminded of the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one that we serve, and what he is capable of. what he promises Israel and what he needs from Israel in order to fulfill those promises for each individual person. He's going to fulfill those promises with or without you. But I want to be a partaker in the goodness of those promises fulfilled. So I don't know about you, but I'm all in, ready to remember as much as I possibly can every single day of my life. And as things get crazier and crazier in this world, super important to keep a really clear head on what's going on. And the way you're going to do that is to keep your eyes focused on Him, what He is doing, and to know what He's doing and to know what things He wants you to know. You need to celebrate these feasts. Okay, so let's continue on with Passover. Okay, so we have a situation where we have a lot of people being led astray to believe that Yeshua reinterpreted Passover. He reinterpreted Pesach. That's what people say. And that the Lord's Supper, which was the last meal He had, they're claiming was actually Passover. And I don't know, maybe you grew up like this. I know I did, thinking that the Lord's Supper was the Passover meal. But in all reality, it couldn't possibly have been the Passover meal that Yeshua was having with His disciples in the upper room. Now I'm going to have another little video about that evening and all the things that happened there, and the beautiful things that, as His disciples, can glean from that evening, because it was a very important meal He had with His disciples, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't Passover, okay? He had to fulfill Passover, which means that He had to actually be the Passover lamb. If we miss this point, we have missed the entire meaning of Passover. We have missed it completely. He had to actually be the Pesach lamb, okay? So as Melchizedek priests, who understand the change in priesthood, who divide the word of truth properly to understand what Yeshua's work actually accomplished, we can look back at Genesis 15 and see the covenant, the blood covenant that was made with Abraham and YHVH. Yeshua actually went through the pieces on Abraham's behalf, if you remember right. And of course that was because YHVH knew that Abraham's descendants were going to break that covenant, and He wanted to prolong that in the future as far as possible, I think, to get more work accomplished. But so Yeshua and YHVH went through the pieces instead of YHVH and Abraham, right? And one of the biggest reasons was because YHVH needed to attach a death position to a covenant that His Son could then pay the price for, and thus redeem mankind. He could pay for original sin, plus He would pay for the breaking of that covenant later when Israel did break it, which He knew they were going to. Of course they were. So He needed to provide creation and His story with a better sacrifice. So Him and His lamb went through the pieces, making that contract together, making that covenant together in Genesis 15. So when you see that and you see the animals that Abraham split in two, it was a bloodbath there. It was a blood ratified covenant. You have the animals split in half. You have the doves who didn't have their bones broken. All of that represented what Yeshua was going to look like and have to go through at Passover. Okay, so He couldn't possibly have been, that couldn't have been the Passover meal that they were eating in the upper room, because on Passover He was going to be murdered like those animals were, basically, okay? But it prophesied that His bones would not be broken. There's so much here to unpack. It's a little overwhelming, honestly, to look at Passover and try to give a full teaching on it, because it truly has taken a mini lifetime of my own to really understand these spring feasts. But I'm going to do my best to just walk you through some of the basics of Passover here. So stick with me as I wrap my brain around it. Okay, so in the teaching that I'm going to do about what happened in the upper room and the covenant confirming meal of the new contract that Yeshua did with his disciples, I'm going to save a lot of this information for that video because it's quite a bit, and to do it here would just confuse everything and bog you down. So let's skip on to Passover. So for now, I just want you to know that the Last Supper was not the Passover meal, okay? All right, so let's go on to unpacking more of Passover. So just so you know, I will try to put a link here to a Prezi presentation. It's kind of like slides. It might be in more of a PDF form this time, that you can go look at, that has a complete and comprehensive study about what happened that evening when he had the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper with his disciples. So the evening, during the night, during the next morning, and that afternoon, the next afternoon, Passover afternoon. So throughout the course of Passover, I have a comprehensive study of what actually took place all throughout that 24-hour period. It wasn't even full 24 hours, but I want you to really get a grip on the scriptural path by which we can find to really nail out when things happened to him during Passover, during that day. And it really nails shut the door on the idea that that Last Supper that he had in the upper room was Passover. It was not Passover. Okay? All right. Okay, so just so you know, I am speaking from a Melchizedek perspective, and so the Passover that we experience, as well as all the spring feasts, all the feasts in general, we look at from a Melchizedek perspective, which what I mean by that is that when we look at the feasts and when we go to celebrate them or rehearse them, we are truly looking for how Yeshua, our rabbi, fulfilled them, what he was speaking about during them. We really want to honor the work of the Messiah and not ignore the change that he did bring and what wonderful things his work actually did accomplish. So one of the things about Passover, if you remember back in Egypt, the Hebrew slaves were commanded by YHVH to sacrifice a lamb. They were actually supposed to bring the lamb into their house, and then they were supposed to love on it. Basically, can you imagine? You're going to have children there that are going to love this little tiny lamb. They're going to name it whether you want them to or not, and then they were going to have to sacrifice this animal on the 14th day. They were going to roast it over a fire, and then they were going to take the blood of that lamb and smear it on the doorposts of their home, on the mantles of the home. And then the destroyer that night is coming through, which in the scriptures, if you look at it, the destroyer is YHVH. YHVH did this. As far as I can see, if you see something different, let me know. But I'm pretty sure that it was YHVH that went through and passed judgment on Egypt. And he would hover over the doorways that had the blood of the lamb on the door. So now when we look at that and we go there, the shadow picture of that, of course, for believers in the Messiah, we look forward to Yeshua, right? Yeshua HaMashiach, who we take his blood that was shed. You can see my little banner there. I'll go over that in a minute. But we take his blood that was shed, and by faith we apply that to the door frame of our hearts, the door of our hearts. And the application of that is really found in unleavened bread. So we have the blood that has been provided for us on Passover to actually take that blood and apply it to the doors of our hearts, door frames of our hearts on unleavened bread. So and I'm going to have a teaching on unleavened bread where we'll talk about that more. But the beauty of it is that unleavened bread is the application of Passover. Okay, so Passover established the actual blood that we need to cleanse us, to make us white as snow, to put on our door frames of our hearts so that the destroyer will pass over us in the end, in the final judgment. Okay, without this blood on our doorposts, we're not going to the happily ever after. You have to have the blood of the Lamb on the doorpost of your heart in order for you to be saved, period. There is no way around this. This is the way that was made for us to live. This is the opportunity, this is the chance that we get only through this blood, okay? One of the coolest things here, and I'll just talk about it right now. You see my banner there? So we have the Lamb, and the Lamb has, that's like Yeshua on the stake, and then the soldier comes up to him, remember, and spears him in the side, and the blood and the water flow out, and it flows down the fissure in the rocks. So the rocks actually, remember, the rocks rent open, and when we were in Israel, we actually saw this. Saw the actual crack in the rocks. It was amazing. And you can see where it cracked all the way down the escarpment where he was. And when he was stabbed in the side by the soldier, the Roman soldier, his blood mixed with the water and it ran down and it anointed the ark. And granted, this is really cool about Shemini Atzeret. These feasts are so intertwined. They're just like, it's crazy. But Shemini Atzeret, they have a ceremony where they mix water in the blood and it flows down. And it's so, they all flow together, so amazing. But underneath Yeshua, Jeremiah had put, he didn't know he was doing this, but Jeremiah, 500 years earlier, had hid the Ark of the Covenant in Mount Moriah. And it happens to be right under where Yeshua was crucified. So when the earth rent and the water and the blood flowed out of him, flowed down through the cracks in the rock, and it actually anointed the west end of the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah. So animal blood was for Passover, for our Day of Atonement, it was always sprinkled on the east side. The east side of the Ark of the Covenant. So the east side of the Ark of the Covenant was always had animal blood on it, right? But the west side of the Ark of the Covenant never had any animal blood. That was waiting for the perfect sacrifice. That side of the Ark of the Covenant was being set aside, set apart, being saved for the real sacrifice of all, the one sacrifice of all time that's going to get rid of all other sacrifices. The blood of the Lamb of Yehovah, Yah's Lamb, was going to get that side, and his blood on the ark on this side does away with all need for animal sacrifices. Okay, that said, there's one thing that I like to make clear when talking about Passover is if you are going out and getting a little lamb and you're bringing it into your home and you're letting your children fall in love with it, and then you sacrifice it on the evening of, or on the 14th day of the first month, and then you are eating it that night for the Passover Seder, then you are in violation of rejecting the work of Yeshua. Okay, it's really as simple as that. That is a sacrifice. That's an animal sacrifice that you're doing, that you're participating in. And I am super strong on this because I know that Yeshua HaMashiach was the final lamb. Okay, so in Hebrews 10:12, it says, "But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of Yehovah." So here you can see that the work of Yeshua and the blood of Yeshua, his sacrifice was it. That's it. We don't need any more sacrifice. Animal sacrifices mean nothing anymore. So if you are sacrificing a lamb for Passover and eating it that night because you want to stay true to the Torah, you've rejected the work of Yeshua, which the Torah is all about. The Torah points to the work of Yeshua. So you need to figure out how to divide the word of truth properly in order to know what is done away with and what remains. This is so important. And if you don't know already, then watch my Shavuot teaching, part 2. It's going to go over the change in priesthoods. And that is a fantastic teaching that you need if you really want to start dividing the word of truth properly, knowing what things were done away with and what things remain. And as a believer in Yeshua, you cannot be sacrificing. Okay, that is a big no-no. All right, so knock it off if you're doing it. And if you aren't doing it, then here, make sure in your heart you know you're for sure why you don't do that anymore. So when it says, I'm going to go through the elements of the Passover Seder here in a few minutes, and I'll show you something that we do to make sure that we're super clear on that and stay away from any sort of mixture there, okay? So again, the Melchizedek mindset and understanding really affects our rehearsal of Passover. It affects our rehearsal and celebration of any feast, but it definitely does to a strong degree of Passover, because we understand and believe in the change that was provided for in Torah. That was shadow picturing the work of Yeshua and what he was going to accomplish with his death, which is so prismatic and so multifaceted that I think we could study it forever and still not fully understand what the work of Yeshua did that day. But one of the things I know for sure is that it gave us better blood, okay? And the animal blood just doesn't cut it anymore. The only blood that does work is Yeshua's blood, and we need that blood in order to get to the happily ever after. We have to get cleansed in his blood and apply his blood to the doorframe of our hearts by faith that Papa will do what he says he will do, and that you can trust that it has been done if you ask for it, and you have the indwelling of the Ruach HaKodesh, and then you eat of Yeshua, which we're going to talk about during Unleavened Bread. But super, super, super important. You are not going anywhere good without this blood. Okay, so here are some scriptures that I want you to write down so that you can go read and study what YHVH ELOHIM tells us to do for Passover and his commands or his instructions for Passover, okay? And the actual event. Okay, so just so you remember, Passover happened once. It happened to the Hebrew slaves when they came out of Egypt. Okay, so he passed over them, and when they had the blood on their door frames. Okay, so it's an event that we rehearse. Okay, in the future, there's going to be a Passover too, in the sense of he's going to pass over our hearts. If we have the blood of Yeshua on the doorframe of our hearts, then he'll pass over us when it comes to the judgment day. Okay, but here's some scriptures for you to look up: Exodus 12:2-11 and 43-46. He's telling you when it happens. If you notice, it says this month shall be the beginning of months for you. Very interesting, super good clue right there as to when the head of the year is. It is to be the first month of the year. To speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this month, they are to take a lamb. Okay, so that's when they were supposed to select the lamb, on the 10th day of the first month. And then on the 14th day, they would slaughter it. But down further, he says, your lamb shall be an unblemished male, 1 year old. Okay, so this also helps us understand this is a shadow picture of Yeshua, remember? And so Yeshua HaMoshiach was a 1 year old perfect lamb, right? He didn't have a 3-year ministry. He had a 1 year ministry, 70-week ministry, basically. So he was given an extra month. How cool is that? Because it was a 13th month year that year. But this is super important to remember. He had to fulfill everything that his father had already laid down. So to say that he was, in the field ministering for 3 years negates this whole 1 year old lamb idea. So when he came out of the wilderness at Rosh Hashanah and after his tests, and he passed the tests, and therefore he was qualified to continue on into ministry because he didn't believe that Yehovah abandoned him in the wilderness. He didn't buy the lies of Hasadan. He didn't kill himself like Hasadan wanted him to. He didn't make a transaction with Hasadan. He passed all those tests, basically getting taken back to creation, getting to redo the test that Adam failed to do. Yeshua passed it gloriously. He comes out of the wilderness on Rosh Hashanah, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and Yohanan ben Zechariah, or John the Baptist, identifies him in his role as a Lamb of Yehovah. And then he starts his ministry, and you see him go through, starting at Rosh Hashanah. He basically 14 days later, he would have celebrated Passover, and we can see actually in the chronological Gospels where he was at that Passover, that first Passover. He actually went to the temple, and all the merchants were there, remember? And he clears out the leaven from his father's temple the day before Passover that year. Is that not super awesome. Then you follow him through all the feasts throughout the year. You see all the feasts that he celebrates. And you get down to when he actually becomes the lamb the following Passover. Okay, so there wasn't this 3-year nonsense. It's only 1 year, okay? And I know that many studies have been done on, why there's the 3-year thing, but it's really to throw you off and have you serve, in order to have you serve another Messiah, okay? So let's get on the same page with the scriptures and with Yehovah and the actual story that actually happened, okay? So let's continue on in Exodus 12. They were supposed to kill the lamb at twilight. This is super important to remember because Yeshua was actually murdered right before sunset on Passover, right? Which was what? If you remember the timeline right, unleavened bread, which the first high Shabbat of unleavened bread starts at sunset on Passover. So he had to be off the cross, off the stake at sunset, right? Which he was. He was dead by then, and they got to take him off and put him into the grave. Okay, so here, let's keep tracking with this. Take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which you eat. Okay, so that he can pass over. You shall eat it with, you shall eat the flesh of that lamb that night, roasted with fire, and you shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Okay, there's the standard by which we get the bread, the matzah, and the bitter herbs. Okay, and the lamb. I wonder if they had butter. I didn't know, but I like butter with my matzah. It is Yehovah's Passover. Notice that. He claims this as his Passover. So when you see Passover of the Jews or the Jewish Passover or something like that, that's nonsense. That it is not just for the Jews. You had all of Israel there at this time, right? In Egypt, all of Israel, all 12 tribes were there. Okay, and he clarifies it and he says, it's my Passover. All right, so when we get ahead to Yeshua and we see there, it's his Passover, it's his lamb that's going into the oven. Okay, it's his lamb that is being prepared for us. It's Yeshua, who is Yehovah's lamb, that's being prepared for us, okay? And it all has to do with this incredible covenant that Yehovah makes with Abraham back in Genesis 15. I mean, think about it. They're going through the pieces. If one of them doesn't fulfill the contract, then they die like those animals that were cut in half there. And it just blows my mind because Yeshua goes through those pieces on Abraham's behalf. But Abraham's descendants break that contract. Therefore, Abraham's descendants should look like that. But in fact, Yeshua went through those pieces on their behalf. So it's Yeshua that's going to look like that. But it's actually Yehovah's lamb that the two of them go through, and it's Yehovah and his lamb that go through. And so in the end, that lamb was going to be sacrificed for Yehovah. I mean, it can blow your mind if you really start thinking about it. And I know we're going to learn so much more when the King comes back and we get to really hear from him, all these truths. He's going to teach. Oh, it's going to be so lovely because it's going to make us really understand. He's going to help us to really understand all these things that maybe are a little dark right now. Maybe we can't quite wrap our brain around it right now. And maybe there's some detail that we don't have that you just kind of chalk up and go, oh, I don't know. When the Messiah comes, he'll tell us. Like the woman at the well said. But this is super important to begin the process of trying to understand and trying to learn and trying to divide the word of truth, because you must have this blood on your hearts, and you must understand how to apply it to your hearts so you can avoid being destroyed in the end, okay? Most of my neighbors here, they're going to be destroyed. They don't know about this. I want to tell them about this. Do they want this? Maybe, maybe not. If they do, I hope that Papa sends them, the Ruach sends them so that we can speak truth in, or maybe lead them somewhere else for them to learn this. But in the end, because you're here to listen and to learn. You know, because you have the scriptures. You know, because you're seeking and because you're hungry and because the Ruach HaKodesh has made you start looking for this. So without the Ruach HaKodesh moving on your heart to teach you, to move you into situations where you're going to learn the truth about this, you would be a dead meat, right? But you're not. You're on this path to learn. How wonderful is that? So just keep an open mind and an open heart to learn and understand, as long as everything that you learn and you open yourself up to is based on Scripture, okay? You don't want to open yourself up to things that are not based in Scripture, okay? So just clarify that. Okay. That would be super dangerous, right? All right. Okay, then he goes on to say, no foreigner is to eat of it. And we'll talk about that in a second. After you have circumcised, but unless you circumcise him, okay? A sojourner or a hired servant shall not eat of it. And you're not to break any bone in it. Okay, so he's talking about, this is the actual Passover in Egypt, okay? So he gives some instructions there. That's actually prior Melchizedek, the Melchizedek royal law that was given at Mount Sinai, which is super interesting. And then we go on, write this down, Numbers 9, 1-5, and 14. On here you also see in the first month, again, clarifies which month it is. Now let the sons of Israel observe the Passover at the appointed time. On the 14th day of this month at twilight you shall observe it at its appointed times, and you shall observe it according to all its statutes and according to all its ordinances. So he had already laid out the statutes and ordinances in Exodus 12. Okay, at the original Passover. So in Numbers, you see him just reduplicating and say, keep it, like I told you to keep it. Okay. They observe Passover in the first month on the 14th day of the month at twilight. Okay. And then write this down, Deuteronomy 16, 1-8. Observe, and here is a super amazing key to calendar. It says, observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover to YHVH your Elohim, for in the month of Aviv, YHVH your Elohim brought you out of Egypt by night. Okay, I don't know how much more clear YHVH could possibly be here as far as calendar and how to find this, but the head of the year. The head of the year is the month of Aviv, as he's saying. Okay, so that is, why do we throw that out? We can't possibly throw that out. He's telling us right here what the first month is. He doesn't change, does he? So the first month to him here is going to be the same first of the month now, right? So we look at Aviv, and what does Aviv mean? And I think that the studies and the expertise and stuff from people who are in the field, who have done this for their entire life, trying to study Aviv and figure out what this is, should be applauded for all their work. So you've got Michael Rood, Nehemiah Gordon, Keith Johnson, and others who have studied this and know very well what Aviv means. Okay, so we need to know what Aviv means in order to find the head of the year, so that we can count 14 days to Passover. There, it's right there. How amazing is that? It is actually, the word Aviv as the first month is actually found also in the covenant itself, which is amazing in Exodus. I think it's 23, Exodus 23. I'll have to find that and put it right here. Okay, so Deuteronomy 16, 1-8 continues on. It says, you shall not eat leavened bread with it. Okay, so there's a command to not eat leaven. Okay. And then further on down, you are not allowed to sacrifice the Passover in any of your towns which YHVH your Elohim is giving you, but at the place where YHVH your Elohim chooses to establish his name, which obviously is in Yerushalayim. And remember, this is pre-Yeshua, so super important to go up to Yerushalayim for the Feast of Passover, pre-Yeshua, right? Just because we're not sacrificing the Passover, okay? So you're not allowed to sacrifice the Passover is what it's saying. Any other place except Jerusalem. So on this side of Yeshua, we're not sacrificing the Passover anymore. We're rehearsing. Okay, so of course I believe that, if you could celebrate any feast in Jerusalem, you would be super blessed. But as we can see here, the Passover sacrifice was to be made only in Jerusalem, nowhere else. But right now, at this side of Yeshua, we look at the Yeshua's sacrifice did away with all the animal sacrifices. So therefore, we cannot sacrifice the Passover anymore. We rehearse the Passover. Therefore, on this side of Yeshua, we rehearse it wherever we are in exile right now. And I'm sure that getting to rehearse it in Jerusalem with Yeshua HaMashiach, oh my, the Lamb, that is going to be a fantastic rehearsal when the Lamb himself is there to walk us through the Seder and all. Oh, it's going to be so beautiful. That's going to be amazing. But just so you remember, we are not celebrating, or we are not sacrificing the Passover. Therefore, you don't need to go to Jerusalem for this. Okay? Now, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the instructions of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is to be in Jerusalem. Okay, so until, as I say all the time, okay, yes, Papa, I would love to do that. And yet you have not restored my fortunes to be able to fly over there and do that as much as you ask me to do this. This is 3 times a year. He asks us to go over to Jerusalem and meet with him for 3 different feasts. For unleavened bread, 7 days there, Shavuot, and then Sukkot, which is 8 days there. When we went as a family 3 years ago in 2017, and we took 4 people, it cost us $11,000 to fly over there, to stay over there, to eat and do everything we did. That is a lot of money to do that one time. We went over for the Feast of Sukkot. And so, until he restores our fortunes and allows that to happen, or allows us to live in the land again, for heaven's sakes, that's what I would like to do more than anything, is live in his land. But right now, the government that is there will not acknowledge Ephraim if Ephraim is believing in Yeshua HaMashiach. So unless you convert to Judaism, you cannot make Aliyah over there until Yehovah does something about that. So when he does something about that, and he allows, opens the door for us to go over there and live there, then that'll be a fantastic new thing to figure out, right? All right. Especially, and right now we're in the middle of this whole nonsense, this COVID thing, and so you can't even travel anyway, I don't think. Though I have not actually checked, so don't quote me on that, because I don't like to pass rumors around. But I know that the world's going mad right now, so I wouldn't doubt it. Okay, some more verses to write down for you. Ezra 6:19 through 21. This is when Israel actually celebrated Passover later on, you see, when they returned from exile. And then Luke 2:41 to 42. Talks about Yeshua's parents actually going to Jerusalem for Passover. John 1:29, when he was little. John 1:29 is about when Yohanan ben Zechariah acknowledges the Lamb of Yehovah, the one that's going to take away the sins of the world with his more superior blood than animal blood, right? So, and then we see John 19:36 that talks about the prophecy that says, "Not a bone of his will be broken," which actually is based off of Genesis 15:10, that says that the bones of the doves or the birds were not broken. He didn't cut those in half for that covenant confirming thing that they did back there in Genesis 15 with Abraham. Okay, and then 1 Corinthians 5:7 confirms for us again that the Messiah is and was the Passover lamb who has been sacrificed. Yes, I have a little sign right here. Maybe I'll take it down. I have a little sign here called Abraham's tent. So you are in Abraham's tent. Like, we need to remember that. Okay. And then, let's see. Okay, and then write this down, Hebrews 10, 1 through 18, and this talks about the better sacrifice that Yeshua was. His sacrifice was so much better than lambs and animals. So it says later on down, it says, but those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. All right, and then continues on, he sets aside the first to establish the second, and by that will we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Yeshua Messiah once and for all. There you go. Isn't that interesting? So again, dividing the word of truth would be to find out what does he set aside? He sets aside the first to establish the second. So at the beginning it was animal blood, right? So he's going to set that aside now to establish the second, which is Yeshua HaMashiach's blood, which is much more powerful, much more important. That is the deal. That is the gold right there. Okay, and then continuing down in Hebrews 10 there, it says, and there day after day every priest stands and performs his religious duties again and again. He offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sin. Okay, that's the whole point of this, okay, is to take away sin, all right, to give you the opportunity to get your sin taken away so that you can get to the happily ever after, because you can't get to the happily ever after if you have sin in you. Okay, let's continue. But when this priest talking about Yeshua, had offered for all time one sacrifice for all sins, he sat down at the right hand of Yehovah. When he was all done with this, then he sits down at the right hand side of Yehovah. Awesome. That happened on the Ascension, and that's another story. Go find my Ascension Basics video and watch that, and it talks about, we explore that. For by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. Isn't that interesting? So those that are being made holy, those who are being sanctified, those who are being set apart, those that are being made kodesh, he has made them perfect through his blood forever. So that idea is like, I like that idea is that you're being solidified in what you want. Okay, so if you want holiness, you want the blood of Yeshua to cover you, or to wash. Actually, it doesn't just cover you, it has the capability of obliterating your sin, as we find out in Day of Atonement and how Yeshua fulfilled some of that already. But how cool is that? One of the things that I really love is a teaching from John Eldridge called The Utter Relief of Holiness. And granted, it comes from a Christian perspective, but if you can open your mind a little bit to understand what he's getting at there, and the point of what he's getting at is that when you have Yeshua in you, when you have his holiness in you, and then you're being made perfect into his perfection like him, there's a relief. It's a relief to be made holy. It's a relief because you can do things like he did, and you have assurance like he did, and there's so much relief there. No guilt, no like wondering. It's a beautiful thing, the whole idea of the utter relief of holiness that you get to do and have the life that Yeshua had. And you look at him, and he sailed through some of those situations that I think a lot of us would get bogged down in, and just go, oh man, did I handle that right? Oh man, did I say the right thing? Or how do I approach this? Or how do I say this? Or how do I handle this? We'd be all like, torn up inside about how to deal with this. But the more you eat of him and you see how he handled these things and these situations with calmness and the appropriate emotion, honestly, like you see him angry, you see him sensitive, you see him withdrawn, you see him going towards the issue, or you see him in all different kinds of emotions and stuff, but he's the perfect one. And so as he was doing these things and we can see what he was doing, then we know that he was acting appropriately. And the more we eat of him, the more and more we will act appropriately in these situations. and the situations that we find ourselves in, and therefore we will be being made holy and being perfected. And I think that really means is that you're being solidified as in your desire. You're being solidified as a disciple of Yeshua. You're being solidified in that desire and in that holiness that you are growing in. Awesome, huh? Okay, and then continue down in Hebrews 10 at the very end. It says, and where these things have been forgiven, sacrifice for sin is no longer necessary. Nice. Okay. All right, so as we continue on here into unpacking Passover, I just want to go over YHVH's. Yes, he has rules about Passover, as in who can attend and who cannot. So we're going to look at the regulations that YHVH actually has made about Passover. This is a super important part to understand and know prior to you hosting a Seder, okay? All right, so here's another list of scriptures I want you to write down, because YHVH takes his celebrations very seriously, right? And concerning Passover, he has some rules. He has some regulations that he expects his royal priesthood to abide by. All right, so Exodus 12:47. It says all Israel must celebrate. All Israelites must celebrate it. So if you're an Israelite by birth or by being grafted in, it doesn't matter, then you are supposed to celebrate Passover, okay? It's actually a sin. If you see in Numbers 9:13, it's actually a sin to not celebrate Passover. I know, right? I was blown away when I saw that. Like, whoa, sin is not showing up for Passover. He makes it very clear in here. Okay, then also write down Exodus 12:43. In this verse, we see that not everyone is allowed to celebrate it, actually. Exodus 12:45 and Exodus 12:48. So we see that no foreigner is to eat of it. We see that no uncircumcised man is to eat of it. We see that a temporary resident or a hired hand is not to eat of it, okay? All these people can eat of it if they do a certain thing. If they get circumcised, then they can take part. But let's look at that for a second. So no uncircumcised man should eat of it. Male should eat of it. So understanding the new covenant or the new contract and how that works, understanding that circumcision is now of the heart and not the body per se. More important that the heart is circumcised than the body, I guess I should say it in that way. Then we can see that if your heart is not circumcised to YHVH, then you can't partake in Passover. So what does that mean? To have a circumcised heart means that the Ruach HaKodesh is living in you and writing his law on your heart, giving you the new heart, which actually comes with the law written on, and the royal law of love. If you don't have that, if you're not circumcised, as in you have the foreskin, the flesh of paganism and junk and everything off of you, and you're not cleaned up to be pure for YHVH and have the Ruach HaKodesh living in you, keeping his ways, then you cannot keep Passover, okay? So if you're dabbling in Christmas, if you still have Christmas in your world, then you should not be taking part of Passover yet, because you're still not circumcised fully yet. All right. If you're still, dabbling with Easter, if you're trying to do Easter and Passover, and you're trying to do Hanukkah and Christmas, you're not circumcised yet. Okay, because you got to get rid of that foreskin of paganism. Has to be thrown away, cut off and thrown away. All right. You have to be clean and have the Ruach HaKodesh in you, obeying the law, YHVH's law, right? His royal law of love, found in Exodus 19-24. Okay. And then, it says no temporary resident or hired hand shall eat of it. No foreigner is to eat of it. So if you're not an Israelite who has been circumcised to YHVH, then you're not to eat of it. Okay, this is a tricky thing. So follow me through here. So if any of these people want to celebrate Passover, then they have to become like a native-born Israelite. So there's provision for any of these people, anybody, to actually take part in Passover, but you have to become actually native-born Israelite. So at this point, we understand that we can be grafted in through Yeshua. But here, let's look at the regulation here. So Exodus 12:48 to 49 says, if a foreigner resides with you and wants to celebrate the Passover, celebrates Yehovah's Passover. Again, remember, he's claiming the Passover as his own, which is interesting. He's not saying it is the Jewish Passover. It's his own Passover. If you want to, then all males in the household must become circumcised. Then he may come near to celebrate it, and he will be like a native of the land. Isn't that interesting? So all you have to do is have a circumcision of the body back then to be a native of the land, according to Yehovah, to be a native Israelite. But now we get circumcised of the heart to become a native Israelite. Yeah, and then you can take part in Passover. It's got another, Numbers 9:14, again, says basically the same thing. And then Romans 9:8, let's look at that. It says, for not all who are descended from Israel are Israel, nor because they are his descendants are they Abraham's children. On the contrary, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. In other words, it is not the children by physical descent who are Yah's children, but it is the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. Isn't that awesome? So those who are regarded as the offspring of Abraham are those who are children of the promise. That is so cool. All right, so one of the things that I like to talk about during Passover, make sure that we are clear on when we talk about Passover, the regulations of Passover, and begin to unpack it and want to enter into it, is that Passover, it's tricky because as you come out of Babylon and you've got eyes to see and you're so excited about this and you want to share everything that you're learning with your family and your friends and everybody else, it can be really hard to pull back sometimes. I know this for a fact. It's definitely been hard for me to pull back. But Yahweh he's very intense about how he wants and who he wants to celebrate his Passover. So if, it can turn into, you can have a really good heart towards this and you can go, hey, I want to show my Christian friends Passover. So what ends up happening is you do a demonstration of Passover, which that's not good. That's not good. You don't want Passover to become just a demonstration for Christians who are out of covenant, okay? You have to be in covenant to be participating in Passover. So granted, we're rehearsing Passover now, but when you look at the regulations that Yehovah has, you can't go out and publicly announce to everyone to come to your Passover. Yehovah has to approve the people coming to Passover, okay? It's his Passover, remember? So for people who are out of covenant, who aren't living by his law, for them to come to a Passover is simply a demonstration for them. It's not going to have the same effect for them, and it may take away from your Passover and your experience of celebrating his Passover. This is a serious thing, rehearsing his Passover here. So you want to be careful and not turn it into a demonstration, because it is meant for Israel. David Perry writes, we are citizens of the household of Yehovah, keeping Yehovah's appointed times. Passover is not some novel experience to pander or to market. It is a passionate experience to come to this feast from the perspective of an insider, from an Israelite perspective, okay? And so if you're just an outsider, you're not going to really understand it. I remember when I was an outsider, and prior to getting my heart circumcised to Yehovah, and I remember going to our first Passover, and it really meant nothing to me. I was a Christian, and all I could see was this table filled with food, and my kids, my daughters, were not able to eat for, it was a very long time before they could eat the food that was actually on the table, because you had this huge Seder going on. And so, I remember from being an outsider, what it felt like. I remember leaving that Passover meal and Seder that we had driven 5 hours to go to, 4 or 5 hours to go to. I remember leaving saying, I am never doing that again. That was my attitude prior to having my heart circumcised. Once I got my heart circumcised, which didn't happen, I think it was super cool. It wasn't too long after that. I think it was a year or two after that, my heart became circumcised to Yehovah. And the first time I celebrated or I rehearsed Passover, it was like I was a different woman. I was a totally different woman. This was like my history. This was so powerful, and it really impacted me, as does all his feasts. And now look at me. I am the feast priest now. Okay, so I'm not saying feast diva anymore, because but I'm saying feast priest, right? I'm the feast fanatic. So I have totally done a 180 all through the work of Yeshua and the Ruach HaKodesh on my heart. I've done a 180. I have become completely undone with his feasts. I love them. I'm totally, surrendered over to his ways. But I wasn't always that way. So again, just so you remember, Passover should not be a demonstration for people who are out of covenant. This is something special for Israel. Now, if somebody wants to come in to Israel and be part of Israel, they are more than welcome to. Yehovah says, just get your heart circumcised. So that's a process of going through Hanukkah and whatnot, but that's a Ruach HaKodesh issue, not ours, right? We cannot circumcise someone else's heart for them, right? That's the Ruach HaKodesh's job to do when the Ruach HaKodesh knows that she can. If she can or she can't. I mean, if anyone can do it, she can do it, right? Now, with that all said, I want to just make sure that you don't put YHVH ELOHIM into a box, okay? So it is his Passover. If he wants to send you someone for your Seder, how you're going to do it, if he wants to send you someone, that's his problem, okay? All you can do is say, I know the regulations, Papa, but if you want to send someone, please do. And then be open to teaching that person about his ways and what the blood actually means and what the sacrifice of Yeshua on Passover actually is about. Okay, so we never want to put Yehovah in a box. That would be like the worst thing to do. Okay, so know the regulations, but then don't put him in a box and allow him to bring you who he wants, the guests that he wants you to have. This year, crazy that the girls and I were actually in Natural Grocers, and we were stockpiling our basket with things for the feast, and we were there by the dairy looking at stuff to get sour cream and kefir and stuff for our matzah, and this girl comes up to me and she goes, "Are you Rebekah?" And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, yeah, it's Rebekah. And she called her husband over. And it happens to be that they recognize me from YouTube. And ends up, I could not imagine Papa not wanting that meeting to happen. How they were there at the same time we were, and how we came together, and how the whole thing worked with their inquiry the day before. I didn't know it was them, but the day before I had gotten an email right as I was shutting down my computer for the feast. I saw an email pop up, and it was from a man and his wife and a baby on the way who had moved to town, and they were just reaching out to see if we had a fellowship that they could attend, and so that they could try out. And it happens to be the next day I'm in Natural Grocers, and they were there and recognized me. So the idea of Yehovah moving people together, I had to invite them, and it ended up being a glorious, wonderful Seder with them here just the other night, getting to know them, and I knew that Papa moved all that together. So don't put Papa in a box, okay? Okay, as we continue on our journey into exploring and unpacking Passover, we have to kind of clear the path of a couple things. Number one, we have to make sure and clarify that Passover is not Easter, okay? Passover honors YHVH ELOHIM. It honors the work of Yeshua the Messiah. It is our history. It was something that happened to Israelites, the Hebrew slaves, back in Egypt. Passover has nothing to do with Easter. Easter is everything about the pagan fertility goddess and all that nonsense and all that pagan stuff, okay? And if you don't know this already, you need to do your research. This video here is not going to unpack the history of Easter. I just want you to know that Passover and Easter are not the same thing. It couldn't be further apart from each other. They happen to be at the same time. There's reasons for that. But just so you know, Passover is not Easter. Easter is not Passover. So if you are celebrating Easter, then you are participating in a pagan sun god celebration. Okay, it honors the fertility goddess. You don't want to be doing that. If you want to obey Yehovah, then you will leave that and you will get cleansed of that sin, and you will turn and honor the Messiah by keeping and rehearsing Passover. So that is actually what repentance looks like. I mean, to turn from paganism to Yehovah's ways. That is what repentance looks like. Remember, repentance is the word teshuvah or teshuv, and it means to turn away from something towards something. So you're going to turn away from Easter and you're going to turn towards Passover. You're going to turn away from your pagan celebrations, turn towards the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and do what he said to do, and celebrate his feasts and festivals, right? And you may say, hey, I know that Easter was baptized in the blood and it's made new again, or it's made clean. Okay. No, that's complete nonsense. Okay, so people that say that drive me nuts. Okay, so here's the thing you have to remember is that it is the origin of something that makes it clean or not clean, okay? So the origin of Passover has always been clean. It's always been with Yehovah, right? But the origin of Easter has always been in paganism. You can't clean something that started dirty, okay? So you can clean up something that started clean and got dirty, like Hanukkah or Purim. They started clean, and over the course of the millennia, people, the Jews, they've dirtied it and muddled it up, okay? So, but you can clean that up because it started pure, started good. Easter? It never started good. You look at the origins of Easter and it is full of disgusting stuff. I mean, if I said it, it wouldn't be appropriate for your children who are watching. So you want to try to clean that up? You can't. Okay, so knock it off. Just leave it. You don't need it. Okay, if you want to honor the work of Messiah, that's the one you need to be celebrating, not Easter. Easter is all about keeping the pagan god of that celebration alive and well. And let's not do that anymore. Israel. Yeah, Israel. I'm speaking to you. Just knock it off. Come back to Yehovah. And along that lines of knocking it off, let's look at some scriptures. We have Genesis 35:2 that says, "Put away the foreign gods which are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments, and let us arise and go to Bethel." So the idea of, put away the foreign gods among you. That is a foreign god. That is not the God of Abraham. That celebration does not honor the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All All right, and then Exodus 19:10 says also they must wash their clothes and be prepared by the third day, for on the third day Yehovah will come down from Mount Sinai. So the idea of getting cleansed, right? Leviticus 11:45 says, therefore be holy because I am holy. Woo! Let me unpack that one. So Samuel 16:5 says, I have come to sacrifice to Yehovah. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Consecrate meaning kadosh, to be set apart, to be made holy. Okay, Zephaniah 1:7-9, or Isaiah 2:6 says Yehovah has prepared a sacrifice. He has consecrated, or kadosh, or set apart, or made holy his guests. On the day of Yehovah's sacrifice, I will punish the princess, the king's son, and all who are dressed in foreign apparel. Wow. And then Matthew 22:11-14 says, remember that parable about the wedding feast and how somebody got in with didn't have the right garments on, and the king came in and said, how'd you get in here without the right wedding clothes on, my friend? And the man was speechless. And then the king said, tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen. Remember, Israel is chosen, but how you respond to that call is up to you. And then one of the main texts here for not doing things the pagan ways, like the pagans do, is Deuteronomy 12:4, Deuteronomy 12:30-31. It says, do not learn the way of the pagans and worship their gods, and then say you're doing it in my name. So the idea is, do not learn how to celebrate Easter, which is actually a fertility rite, and then twist it so that somehow all of a sudden it's about me, Yehovah, and my ways and my kingdom and what I'm doing, and then try to do that in my name. It's an abomination to him. He doesn't like that. It's disgusting. Okay, so don't learn the ways of the nations around you and how they celebrate to their gods, and then try to take it and twist it and celebrate to using their ideas, using their ways to celebrate to him. Don't do that. He's already got his ways. You don't need more, okay? You don't need those at all. You have beautiful feasts to celebrate. And Passover is an amazing, full, rich, so amazing rehearsal that you could study forever and never really mind the depths of. Okay, so get rid of the others, okay? I think I've said that before. So the Seder that me and my family do is Melchizedek minded. And what do I mean by that? Number one, the focus of it is on the work that Yeshua did. What did his blood actually accomplish? What does his sacrifice actually accomplish? And so we spend some time absolutely looking at the original Passover and what happened in Egypt. Absolutely. So we remember the ways of Yehovah and how he delivered his people. But we definitely looked forward. We spent a lot of time also looking at the sacrifice of Yeshua. And so that is our primary focus on what his work actually accomplished. It also is in that looking at what Yeshua accomplished, we recognize the change in priesthoods that happened during his work there. And then also I believe it is Melchizedek minded because of its saltiness, in the idea that it's not a dry Seder that I do, for sure. Yeshua himself said that we're supposed to be salt, right? We're supposed to be light of the world as well as salt. And salt gives flavor, right? And there has been a lot of different times I've gone to different celebrations, different feasts that other people have thrown or congregations have thrown, especially Passover, and it is dry, just like the awful, matzah cracker that is made. It's awful. It tastes awful. It's like it's lacking salt. It's lacking that beauty. And so when I celebrate Passover, rehearse Passover, it's salty. It's got a lot of flavor to it. So the Haggadah that I use, that I've created, is it's beautiful. It really sets the stage for what happened back at the Passover in Egypt. It also sets the stage for Yeshua's sacrifice and really walks through that. And I do it with involving the children and stuff, and it's beautiful. I set up a beautiful tent for it or whatever I've got handy. So I do the best I can in whatever situation I find myself, but it's salty. Okay, so in that regard, I really think it's a Melchizedek minded, because his disciples, who are Melchizedek priests, will be really applying what our Rabbi Yeshua spoke and what he taught to how they live their lives. So he taught we're supposed to be salt. Fine, I'm going to take that into how do I celebrate Yehovah's feasts and festivals throughout the year. I want to be salt. I'm going to add a lot of flavor to it. Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to put up here just a little bit of something for you to think about, okay? To be Greek-minded is to seek head knowledge. To be Hebrew-minded is to seek doing knowledge. But to be Melchizedek-minded is to seek heart knowledge, okay? Okay, in just a moment, I'm going to show you some things that you need for the Seder. But first, I'm just going to cover a little bit of the change of priesthoods, because Yeshua's work that he did that day for Passover was clearly amazing. Okay, so when you hear me say Melchizedek minded, I am essentially referring to a core belief that is the basis for our beliefs, celebrations, and the teachings that I do. Foundational to the Melchizedek understanding is accepting the fact that the priesthood and law was changed when Yehovah made his son, Yeshua, high priest in the order of Melchizedek, okay? He couldn't have done that without Yeshua going through Passover, all right? This is a core belief of a follower of Yeshua, and to throw this change out in favor of an Aaronic or Levitical priesthood is to reject the work of Yeshua. You cannot reject his work and be saved, okay? You can't reject what he did and what he accomplished and be saved. It's really that simple. He says that you must see and believe that he is who he said he is. Remember when he's talking to the Pharisees and his disciples, you must see and believe. You must see him and you must believe he is who he said he is, right? Accepting the fact that his work actually did change the law is actually crucial in helping us divide between what was nailed to the cross and what still remains. Okay, this is like rightly dividing the word of truth. It takes a mature person to be able to do this, but it is super important. As in, what law has always been and what heavy law did he remove, okay? And this is key, I think, for us as believers trying to impact people that we love who are Christians. Okay, so Christians know that something changed at the cross. When Yeshua died, they know something changed. And it did. Something did change. So you can't say to a Christian nothing changed and be scripturally true. You have to know for certain yourself what it was that actually did change so that you can enter that conversation with your family and friends from a standpoint of really understanding and dividing the word of the truth properly, okay? So if you want to study this and learn some more and be guided through the scriptures on this, please go get the book that's listed in the description below, which is Back to the Melchizedek Future. That book is going to help unpack this for you in a way that I can't do right here, right now. You can also go look at my Shavuot video, Basics video Part 2. That will help to unpack it a little bit more. But as an overview, because I think this is important to cover at Passover, I think it's super important to cover at Passover because this is what his work did. This was his work. I mean, this is part of his work. If he hadn't done this, we would not have what we need to get into the happily ever after. This is the way that was provided. Throughout the course of the feast, you'll see how all of them work together, so you can't really have one without the other. But this is like the beginning of his spring feast work, and we need all of them together, but this is crucial. So let's just give it just a little overview right here. So I want to give you some scriptures here, so get your pen and paper and write these down. Genesis 49:10. Okay, we got to start with this. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. This is crucial. Okay, until the Messiah comes. Shiloh is a reference to the Messiah. Okay, Yeshua, actually the Messiah, Shiloh, did come, and he fulfilled the prophecies about this new priesthood. Okay, YHVH refers to him as the priest in a royal order. So let's look at those verses. Write these down. Hebrews 5:10. Being designated by Elohim as a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. Okay, Hebrews 6:19 through 20. Having become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Psalms 110:4, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews 7:14, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. You get the gist here? Hebrews 7:14, did I already say that one? Yes, I did. Hebrews 7:24 says, but because Yeshua lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood, which is this Melchizedek royal priesthood, right? And then Hebrews 7:11 through 13. Now, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the people received the law. Interesting. What further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek and not be designated according to the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed, there is made a necessity, a change also of the law. Interesting, right? You've got to unpack that to understand. That's huge right here. You have Shaul or Paul actually teaching on this, and I know, Peter says about Paul, he's like, he's hard to understand, right? And Paul or Shaul is actually trying to unpack this change for us, and I think that's why Peter thought he was a little hard to understand, is because I don't know if Peter actually was getting and understanding this change that Shaul or Paul is trying to unpack. Okay, so then in Exodus 19, 5-6, I think the wind is not going to blow down the tent. It's very solid. Isaac made it solid. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure to me, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Right? So the first Melchizedek contract between YHVH and Israel was a covenant, and it was written down by Moses in a book. Okay, so then in Exodus 24, we see him say, then he took the book of the covenant, which is actually a different word. It's the word Brit, then law. The Hebrew word for law is Torah, but the Hebrew word for covenant is Brit. It says, then he took the book of the covenant, or the book of the Brit, and read it to the people. And they responded, we will do everything YHVH has said. We will obey. Okay, but then actually they don't obey, right? Then you see later on that Israel in Exodus 32, 1-6, Israel actually breaks the contract that they made. These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there'll be a festival to YHVH. So they were worried. They were like frustrated because Moses was up on the mountain for too long, and they thought he had died in all the smoke and everything and the fire on the mountain. And so they demanded that Aaron make them a golden calf. And with that golden calf incident, they broke that covenant that they had just made, where he said, I was going to make you a nation of priests. Okay, and all of a sudden they were thrown into imposed law. This is Levitical law. Levitical law is not covenant law. It wasn't blood ratified with covenant confirming meal on the floor of heaven like the first one was. Extra law came because now Israel is sick. It's like called prescriptive law, right? So now YHVH turns to plan B for a little bit, and he says, okay, you're sick, I'm going to give you priests. So I'm going to create Levi. The tribe of Levi is now going to minister to you, and until Shiloh come. Okay, Okay, and then we see that second book right here in Deuteronomy 31:26, where it says, take this book of the law, which is the word Torah, and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of YHVH ELOHIM, so that it may remain there as a witness against you. Okay, so we see that the extra law, the imposed law, the heavy law, Yehovah's like trying to help them stay in a situation where he can be with them, right? Because they broke that contract. I cannot believe they broke that. If they had not broke that contract, they didn't have to break that contract that soon. I mean, the contract was going to get broken at some point because Yehovah needed that death position enacted so that Yeshua could pay the price for original sin. So at some point it needed to be broken. As he said, he actually says that he created that covenant with a fault in it, and the fault being that it didn't come with the Ruach HaKodesh. So it was guaranteeing that it was going to be broken, but that was so that Yeshua could pay the price for original sin, but it didn't have to be broken that soon. But anyway, we see here in Deuteronomy 31:26 that there's a second book, okay? So people who say that there's no two books, they're not two books, that they're the same book, it's ridiculous, because in the Torah it tells us specifically here that we see two different words used. We have one word to talk about the book of the covenant, and we have another word talking about the book of the law. Okay, and the book of the law is not placed inside the Ark of the Covenant like the book of the covenant is. Covenant is put inside the Ark of the Covenant, the tablets of stone where he writes the covenant on it. There in the Ark of the Covenant, we see that the book of the law is put on the outside of the Ark of the Covenant as a witness against Israel, to say, you broke the covenant that's in this ark. You broke it. That's why you have more law, Israel. That's why you have priests that are ministering to you instead of you as a whole entire nation being ministers and priests, royal priests for me out in the world, gathering people and bringing them into covenant with me. This is why you're in the situation that you're in, is because you broke it. And it was a reminder there, okay? This is important to remember when in order to understand what was nailed to the cross, okay? So we're going to get to that in a second, but something I was going to say, now I can't remember. Oh, so when Ron Wyatt actually found the Ark of the Covenant and he went in there, it's very, very interesting that he said that there was on the outside a book, and it was missing Genesis. So he thought that book was the Torah, as in the 5 books of Moses. But I personally think that there would not be a book missing there in that incredibly holy space. He says it's missing. I say it's not missing. I say it was never supposed to be there, because it's that what he found was actually the book of the law that was set against Israel. Okay, so it had Exodus through Deuteronomy in it, as far as I understand him saying. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. And Exodus through Deuteronomy has, not only does it have some of the Melchizedek law in there, because it explains what's in the royal law, absolutely. So you have some Melchizedek issues that show up, absolutely, in there. It helps to expand our understanding of what the royal law, what is the royal law or the covenant of Exodus 19 through 24 is, absolutely. But in there is all the Levitical law as well. You know, tzitzits and you know, just continuing on there. And those he found in a book outside of the ark. Is that not cool? Yeah. That blows me away. That's what I understand. I obviously wasn't there. I obviously can't see it myself, but that's what I understand. So, and then we see a very important scripture that unpacks what was nailed to the cross that day on Passover. It says, having canceled the debt ascribed to us in the decrees that stood against us, he took it away, nailing it to the cross. This is Colossians 2:15. So here we clearly see that something was nailed to the cross, okay? And it is the witness against us that was nailed to the cross. And the witness against us, what was that again? It was on the outside of the Ark of the Covenant. It was witnessing against us that we had broke what was inside the Ark of the Covenant. So what's inside the Ark of the Covenant has not gone away. Okay, that first contract to keeping what was in that ark, which is basically the ketubah, the royal law of love that has been everlasting, always been and always will be. So that stays in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, that never went away. But what did go away was the imposed extra Levitical law that's on the outside. That was a witness against us that we broke what was inside. Okay. Very important. So his work on Passover did away with that extra Levitical law. All right? The heavy law, the burdensome law. He said that to follow him would be a light burden, right? Not a heavy burden. And the Levitical law was heavy. And not only that, I mean, then the rabbis and the Pharisees and all the religious leaders were piling on even more with their oral law nonsense. And they were just piling on all these laws on the people, just heavy, heavy burdens, right? And he came to lift that burden. So what he did was he nailed the heaviness, heavy burden, heavy law to the cross and reestablished only the Melchizedek law with a new contract. The second contract is how I call it. The second contract, because the second contract is the superior contract. It comes with the new heart that has his law written on it, and it comes with a helper, the Ruach HaKodesh, that helps you keep it. So you're going to be able to keep that contract that's in the Ark of the Covenant so much better with the second contract that Yeshua brings with his work. His work gives us the new heart that has the law, the royal law of love that's written on the tablets of stone that are in the Ark of the Covenant. That is written on your heart, and he gives you the Ruach HaKodesh that now is your helper that helps you keep that. All right, keep it, and you can begin to keep it perfectly, like he says. He says, you know, the more you eat of Yeshua, the more you'll have him in you, which is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But the more you eat of him, you will be able to keep that law perfectly. All right, let's go out. Let's read just a couple more things here, and then I'm going to go over the things that you need for your Seder and a little bit on that. Hebrews 8:7-12 says, "For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant or the contract, no place would have been sought for another." Okay, so you have the first basically being set aside for the second, right? "The days are coming, declares Jehovah, when I will make a new covenant or a contract with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah." There's that looking forward into the new contract coming, right? That's superior to the old one. And then Hebrews 8:6 says, "But now hath he, Yeshua, obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant or contract, which was established upon better promises." How cool is that? So he's the mediator of a better contract to that royal law of love that's in the Ark of the Covenant, which is his Father's words. Awesome. I just love this. And then 1 Peter 2:9 says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation." Okay. A particular people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of this darkness into the marvelous light. All right, so I know that was long to kind of unpack what Yeshua's work actually accomplished. Okay, so I feel that it is, at this time at Passover, it is so important to remember the work of Yeshua and what actually was nailed to the cross and what remains, okay? So what was nailed to the cross was the extra law that was given to Israel because of their sin of breaking the covenant, okay, back at Mount Sinai. But what remains is not only has it always remained what is inside the Ark of the Covenant, which is the covenant itself, which is the royal law of love that has always been and always will be. It's never gone away. What remains is that and the new contract that Yeshua brought with his blood, with his sacrifice, so we could keep what is in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay? let's go on to seeing what you need for the Seder, okay? So as a Melchizedek priest, you're gonna throw a Seder for your family, for yourself. Here's some things that you might need. Okay, so one of the things that I do for Passover is I actually serve substitute lamb. And I do that for a couple reasons, because I wanna remember that Yeshua is our substitute. I wanna remember the ram that was provided for Abraham when he went to sacrifice Isaac. A substitute was provided, and it was a shadow picture of the Messiah being a substitute for us. And so I serve substitute lamb in the sense of it's vegetarian. It's not real lamb, it's a substitute. Now I know that he was the lamb, and we actually the other night we actually did eat some lamb as well. So but I also like to remember that he was a substitute. So you have a lamb, that's totally fine. He said to have lamb. I don't have an issue with that. It shouldn't matter what I think anyway. I'm just giving you suggestions, but I do like to make sure that we honor the work of Messiah and say he was our substitute. I'm hungry. Okay, and then also you are going to need some wine for your Seder. You might want a nice Merlot or some grape juice, either or. And for the kiddos, definitely some sparkling grape juice would be good. But you're definitely going to need some wine. This one is good. And then something I like to do, like our brother Judah does, is I like to make haroset. And haroset reminds us of the mortar that the Hebrew slaves used when they were making bricks. And so haroset is basically apples and dates and walnuts and some wine in there. I have some golden raisins this time and some cinnamon, some spices. It's so good. That's delicious. And we eat this at a specific time in the Seder to celebrate, and it's super good with matzah. And later you can put some vanilla yogurt on it with the matzah, and it's like a little dessert. Okay, so, and then definitely, like our brother Judah does, it's part of the Seder, the traditional Seder. Definitely gonna need some parsley with some salt water. You're gonna dip some parsley in the salt water in representation of the tears of the Hebrew slaves from, bondage. And honestly, I have to say something that we discuss on Passover is how we are in bondage still, and how we need a deliverer still. I mean, if you think you're free, you're not. You are under the thumb of governments, pagan, wicked governments. Everything you do is regulated. Freedom, you don't have a ton of freedom. Okay, you have the freedom right now to worship. Yes, you have some freedoms, yes, but in all reality, you're not free. You're a slave, and you need an Elohim to do for you what you can't do for yourself. You need an Elohim to deliver you. You need a deliverer. And in the end, Yeshua, the Messiah, is going to come back, and he's going to deliver us from all bondage that we find ourselves in, whether we bring it on ourselves or whether we just exist here doing our very best. We still are under the watch of pagan rule, okay? And we're in exile. And even if we were in the land, it's not his yet. I mean, he hasn't claimed it yet and made it his own and put his Melchizedek government there yet. So anyway, during Passover, we discuss, who our taskmasters are. This is a representation of, how horrible slavery is and the bondage of it. And it's like a duh. But spend some time during your Seder talking about your own personal, how this has affected you, and how, what you want to be set free from, and what taskmasters still control you. And some of those you can't do anything about. You actually need a deliverer. And when Israel finally gets on their knees and realizes they need a deliverer, and when they cry out and beg for a deliverer, and I think that's going to be a good day, when they're not just content where they are, but they actually realize how much they need a deliverer, But they won't know while everything is just easy, right? So it has to get hard for his people to rise up or get down on their knees, right? It has to get hard for many, many reasons. But one of the reasons, I think, is so that Israel will cry out and ask for a deliverer. And by the way, not just ask for deliverer, but ask for the deliverer, right? Okay, another thing you're going to need for the Passover Seder is some bitter herbs. This happens to be horseradish, and let me tell you, eating it like this is so much worse than eating just a scoop of the already like bubbies. It's already mashed up and stuff. It has some other stuff in it. This will just bring tears to your eyes real fast. This is also to help us remember the bitterness of slavery. Like I said, though, I think we all know how bitter that is, but it is part of the Seder and something that I like to do because Yehovah said to do it. He said, yeah, bitter herbs, matzah, and lamb, did he not? Mm-hmm. All right, then also you're going to need for the Seder, you're actually going to need a Haggadah. And Haggadah actually will walk you through the Seder. So it's like the order of, the Seder means order of service. Haggadah means a telling of the story. So you need to find or make yourself a Haggadah that will help guide your evening. Now, our Haggadah, mine is for sale on Rebekah Co. So if you go to teshuvaministries.com, click on shop and go to Rebekah Co. and you can find this there. We'll redirect you to our publisher so you can buy it there. This is a 5-hour Seder, no doubt. No joke. This is a 5-hour Seder, but it is kid-friendly, family-friendly. And if you don't have a family and you don't need those parts, you just skip right on over those parts and continue on with the Seder. But this is a Melchizedek-minded Seder. It has teachings in it about everything we kind of just talked about and more. So there are a lot of really fun things to do in my Haggadah for the Passover Seder, and things to eat and things to, you drink your wine and you eat things and you write things and you do some journaling and you do some acting things out. And then you go through the story of Egypt and the Exodus out of Egypt, and then you come forward into learning about the prophetic shadow pictures in the story of the Passover of Egypt, and learn about Yeshua and how he is our deliverer, and what his sacrifice as the Passover lamb, the final Passover lamb, meant for us. So definitely go find a Haggadah that you like, or combine Haggadahs and make it your own. Get mine, get someone else's, and kind of combine them if you want, whatever the case may be. I go through this and I'm like, I want to edit it. I constantly want to edit my stuff and don't feel that I'm completely done. But that's because I get new pearls all the time from Yeshua and the Rock and Yehovah, and so I want to incorporate them into the things that I create so that I remember next year what wonderful things they gave me this year. Okay, and then something that I do for my guests when they come to our Seder is I make these really thin candles, somewhere around Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is all about light, so I like making candles at Hanukkah. But I give a candle to every person who comes, and I let them light it from the menorah or the Shabbat candles that we have going on our Seder table that night, in order to just tell Papa that they want to be a light for him, and tell Papa that they want to take the blood of Yeshua by faith and apply it to their heart. And it's a nice little tradition, and it burns into the night and burns down and can make a really nice glow. All right, and then of course, most important, you are going to need unleavened bread, because he says, eat unleavened bread, eat bitter herbs, and lamb, right, for the Passover meal. And this is unleavened bread, and like our brother Judah does, which I love this tradition, it's called the afikomen. And just so you know, it is the only Greek word in the entire Hebrew Seder. Yes, how it's so amazing what this word means, afikomen. So this is a tradition that our brother Judah does every single year, and they miss the whole point of it because they don't believe in Messiah Yeshua. But this bread, which is unleavened, represents the unleavened one, because leaven in the scriptures most of the time represents sin, right? Sometimes it doesn't. I've seen where it doesn't, but most of the time it represents sin. So with Passover, you're getting all the leaven out of your house on Passover, which is interesting. Actually, he says to do it on the first day of unleavened bread. You're supposed to get all the leaven out of your house on that first day. But the Seder, because you eat the Seder in the evening, so you're actually going to eat it at the very beginning of unleavened bread. You have to have unleavened bread. Okay, so there's a reason for that, in the sense of not only back in Egypt when the Israelites were coming out of Egypt and they were basically running out of Egypt to get away from Pharaoh that night. They didn't let their bread rise, right? And so it's called, and then it's also called the bread of affliction and that sort of thing. But so we eat matzah to represent that, in honor of that. But we also know that this represents our Messiah, who is the unleavened one that we're supposed to eat of. Okay. Now, I was talking about the afikomen. So the afikomen tradition is super cool. So you have like 4 pieces of linen and 3 matzahs. So you're going to separate them out with your linen. So you're going to put 1 piece of matzah, a linen, another piece of matzah, piece of matzah, a linen, another matzah, and a linen, right? And you take that middle one out and you break it. And then you wrap this in linen, and then you hide it away, okay? And you hide it away. And then at the end of the Seder, the kids are released to go find the afikomen, and then they get a prize. Whoever finds the afikomen gets a prize. Well, as believers in Yeshua, what does that represent? This is Yeshua. You've got Father, Son, Mother. You've got YHVH ELOHIM, Yeshua HaMoshiach, Ruach HaKodesh, represented there with the 3. The middle one is Yeshua. You take that out. He was broken for us. He was wrapped in linen. He was put into the grave. He was hidden away. And then at the end, he's found. He comes back. He's ready. And then you must eat of him. And that's the trick, is at the end, the afikomen comes back, and then it's broken, and everyone in the room has to eat some of the afikomen. How can you not know that doesn't represent Yeshua? It does. But here's the cool thing. The word afikomen, do you know what it means? Afikomen means, in Greek, it's a Greek word, remember? Afikomen means, I came. How cool is that? It is believed that that word was added, and this tradition was added to the Hebrew Seder by the disciples of Messiah to honor his work and to say, he came. All right, just a couple things. I wanted to show you some things, some videos that you might like. Search for the Red Sea crossing right here. They have found chariot wheels on the bottom of the sea in the Gulf of Aqaba. Super awesome study. So if you don't know anything about that, you've got to get some videos on this in order to know that there is evidence for the Exodus. How cool is that? You can also see patterns of evidence that also goes over this. to find artifacts that prove the Exodus story. The Moses controversy, that's another one that is really awesome to watch at this time of year. And then also another video that you must watch this time of year is called the Jonah Code. 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish was Jonah. And remember, Yeshua said it is to a wicked and adulterous generation that I give only one sign of who I am. Basically, it's a sign of Jonah. So he was going to be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, just like Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a whale, or in a fish. So this is super important to really get a grip on during this time of year. During the spring feast, so this whole week. You know what's interesting is awesome that this week, right now, this is 2020, so 6020 from creation actually, and this week follows the same timeline of Yeshua's week when he was here. So Passover was on Wednesday. Passover this year was on Wednesday. And then unleavened bread started on Thursday for him. Unleavened bread starts on Thursday for us. Yesterday. And then you have one day, Friday, prep day. We have the prep day today, and then tomorrow's the weekly Shabbat. He's going to resurrect at the end of Shabbat, which happens tomorrow, and then first fruits on Sunday. Same thing here, and then the week of unleavened bread finishes up next Wednesday. Same pattern. It's the same, rhythm this year as it was for him. And all the times we've been doing it, this I think is only the second time that this has happened. All right, some fun videos for the kiddos. The 10 Commandments. This is really cool. This has Ben Keasley, Christian Slater plays Moses. That's a really good one. And of course, the 10 Commandments by Cecil DeMille, however you say that. I like that. That's fun, except for when he turns into Moses and then he gets all weirded out. I don't like that part. And then this one with Ben Kingsley, Moses. I like this one because it really delves into this. Moses is like, I don't know, it puts a personality to him that is interesting. Although Maggie was just doing some research in Josephus about Moses, and honestly, some of the stuff in Josephus doesn't match like this. Like the idea of humble, most humble in the world and that sort of stuff, doesn't mean that he was humble, meek, but actually other things. So study Josephus to really find out what Moses was like. That's an interesting study and where he came from. The idea that Josephus says he was married before to perhaps an Ethiopian. Josephus says that he knew who he was and he was going to, and that Pharaoh was scared of him in that he felt that Moses was going to take over and rule Egypt. That was the goal, to do away with the slavery thing and stuff. So there's a lot there to unpack about Moses, actually, that maybe we don't know quite. We don't really understand Moses very well, I don't think. And that he had been, a military man, and he had been a leader, and he was very arrogant and proud, I think, as Josephus says it, and he's very, very handsome, and he needed to go into the wilderness to shepherd sheep for 40 years so that he could get Egypt out of him and pay attention and be the humble that Papa needed him to be. The animated stories, Moses right here, and then of course the Prince of Egypt. That's a really good one. And let's see, I think that's all there. And then I have the Creator's Calendar by Makaru that you need to get to understand how to find Passover. And of course, if I didn't touch on this before, just touching on it again right now, the Chronological Gospels helps you know how the events of Passover actually occurred, and this will help you understand the chronological order of everything that happened to him on Passover. Okay, so I think that pretty much concludes my Pesach basics video. Definitely go get my Spring Feast book. It helps to unpack this even more. And in here you also have the Haggadah that I have for the Seder is in here. You can also get the Haggadah separate right here, so you can pass it out to your guests that night and see it's like, yeah, one's thin, one's thick. All right, I am so done. I am so glad that I got to do this video here in Abraham's tent and share with you my experience of Passover this year. I love this tent, and perhaps when you go to set up your Seder, then you can also set up an Abraham's tent. Maybe it won't be this big, maybe it will, but maybe you can do a little one in your house just to set apart the day of Passover and the whole week, actually, of the spring feast. That's what I like to do, is I like to take and create an atmosphere that's going to set apart in my family's minds and in my mind, set apart the spring feast this week so they remember where we are in time. And I think that is super important. So may you be blessed with creativity and joy as you prepare and enter into Passover. Oh, and I pray that you really accept the work of Yeshua and his blood, and that can actually obliterate your sin now, wash you clean in his blood. And I hope that you look forward to the day that he is completely vindicated by this beautiful evidence in the earth that we have of his blood on the west side of the Ark of the Covenant. So that will be revealed all in good time when Yehovah wants it to be. So for shalom, and I'll see you in the next video. Shalom. Have a wonderful spring feast season. Shalom. So man, that is loud. It's so rude. Man. So, Joseph, I haven't seen. Wait a minute, Joseph, what is this one in here for? Anyway, that's